everybody, my name is Susie Petersen. I'm with the Backyard Habitat Certification Program. I'm here today to talk to you about the program itself and also just native plants and what you can do in your yard to create habitat for birds and pollinators. I'll start by sharing that the program is co-managed by two local nonprofit conservation organizations, Portland Audubon and Columbia Land Trust. For those of you who might not be familiar with Columbia Land Trust, we're a conservation group that stewards about 44,000 acres along the Columbia River. So it starts in Astoria and heads all the way east past the Dalles. The Backyard Habitat Program is a really important part of the conservation work we do because we're helping to create corridors to connect natural green spaces to our properties and to other natural areas further south. The other organization is Portland Audubon, and many of you might be familiar with them. Their mission is to inspire all people to love and protect birds, wildlife, and the natural environment upon which life depends. They do lots of programming for adults and youth as well. They also have a wildlife care center where you can take injured birds, and they have a nature store. So the mission of Backyard Habitat is to provide tools, resources, and recognition for gardening sustainably and gardening for wildlife. To date, we have over 6,200 participants in the program. That totals about 1,500 acres, which is pretty cool considering we're talking about smaller urban lots here. 2,000 of those properties are certified, and we have a handful of volunteers that have provided over 14,000 volunteer hours to the program. So how does the program work? Okay, so say you're interested in participating in the program. The first thing you do is go to our website, which is backyardhabitats.org, and you would fill out a form there and then pay a small $35 fee. We try to keep the cost really low. That's about 1/10 of our overall cost, just so that it's not a barrier for participation. Once you enroll, we connect you with one of our habitat technicians. They come out and walk around your yard with you and ask you, what are you interested in? Maybe you want to designate a corner of your yard for habitat, but you also really want to grow food. That's a great combination. You can do both of those things. So they'll talk to you about what your goals are. And then they'll also take down information such as what nuisance weeds are here, so that we can provide you with information on how to remove those. They also look at your growing conditions, like what kind of sun you get, what kind of soils you have, and how much water is retained on site, so that they can put together a really comprehensive site report that you can use to create habitat in your yard. So along with that, we provide a resource packet that's full of handouts, information, and coupons that you can use to get discounted native plants. One of the coupons we offer is for Cornell Farm. So this is the native plant section. You can come here and go shopping and get a discount. We provide all those resources, and then it's up to you to really dig in, get your hands dirty, plant those plants, and once you do that and are ready for certification, then we send out one of our volunteers. And the volunteers walk around, confirm that you've met the certification criteria, and then give you a really pretty sign. This is our in-progress sign, but we have an even cooler metal one that you'd get. And that way you can showcase to your neighbors the work that you've put into creating habitat. And that will help spread the word around your neighborhood. Your neighbors will get signed up, and that's always inspiring to know that you're helping to create even more habitat. For getting certified, we have 5 different certification criteria. The first one is removing noxious weeds. The second is planting native plants. And then we have stormwater management, reducing or eliminating the use of pesticides, and last but not least, wildlife stewardship. And there are 3 different certification levels. The first certification level is silver, so that's the one that most folks get to first. And then they either decide to stay there, they've got other things they want to do with their yard, or they want a naturescape even more, and they move up to gold, and then eventually on up to platinum. So this sounds like a little bit of work, right? But why is it important? There are lots of reasons that it's important. The first is that 367 different species of birds and other wildlife call this region home. So before a bunch of people moved in here and kind of took over, this was a hub for birds and other wildlife. This area is part of the Pacific Flyway, so we literally have millions of birds flying through this area as they migrate from Central America up to Alaska. It's a really crucial area because we have two major rivers coming together. We've got the Columbia River and the Willamette River, and then we've got all these wetlands in the middle. And so this is a really vibrant habitat for migrating birds and for the birds and other wildlife that are here year-round. Some sad details that also help explain why building habitat is really important. 25% of common birds, as in birds that stay here year-round, are in decline. So that's a quarter of our birds are really struggling to find habitat and food to live out their life cycle and to breed and carry on. So that's something that we're hoping to mitigate. We also have 30 different bee species that are extinct or critically imperiled in this area. And we all know that bees are really struggling and have been for a while. And so this is something that you can do. You can do things at home to really help with this and to really help support our bee populations. So some causes of decline are a little bit easier for individuals to act on. All of these we can act on collectively, but climate change and housing development, a little bit harder to control. But what we can do a lot of in our yard is addressing loss of habitat. We can do things to create more habitat. We also have control over whether we use pesticides, over window strikes, so birds hitting windows in our home and our office, and also cats. We can control whether we let them outside or not. So there are many things we can do in our yards to help compensate for some of these causes of decline. All right, so I'm now going to go through each of the certification criteria in more detail, but I encourage you to think about whether or not you're in the program. These are things that you can do. So I'm going to be talking about them as certification criteria, but just know that you don't have to be in the program to do these things. The first one is removing noxious weeds. Most people understand at this point that ivy, Himalayan blackberry, and knotweed, and many others are really problematic for our natural areas. They overtake trees, they overtake native planted areas, and just really cause a lot of problems. In fact, 4,600 acres of natural area in our country are lost every day to these nuisance weeds. The more individuals can take care of these in their yard, the less these weeds grow out of control and move into our natural areas. So anything you can do to help with these is a huge help for our natural areas as well. These weeds contribute to a lack of biodiversity in our ecosystems. They inhibit forest regeneration, they contribute to soil erosion, they alter soil nutrient content. And so what we do in our program, and you can even find some of this information on our website, is we provide handouts to each participant on the weeds that are identified in their yard so that they can take action and help remove those. So we want to take a yard that is full of ivy, and you'll see many of those around, and instead plant native plants and turn them into thriving ecosystems with lots of plant diversity and lots of wildlife diversity. And then the second component is planting with native plants. And we use a term called native-scaping to kind of describe an area that's been planted with mostly native plants. And that's what we're encouraging folks to do when they're in the program. So for silver certification, you only need to plant 5% of your yard with native plants. The rest you can set aside for a play area for your children or your grandchildren, to grow food or to have a dog run. So just finding 1/4 and dedicating 5% of your yard, you know, that can make a big difference, and that would get you to silver certification. And then for gold certification, you just need to increase that a little bit more to 15% of your yard. And then for platinum, the highest level, 50% of your yard would need to be nature-scaped. So the term native plant gets tossed around a lot and can be used in different ways. In our program, there's a particular resource that we use. It's called the Portland Plant List. And we use this list not because we prefer Portland over other cities, just because they happen to put a lot of time and energy into creating a really comprehensive list of plants that have been here in this area in our ecoregion for thousands of years, so pre-European colonization. And it's important to recognize this because these native plants are the plants that our insect populations and our bird populations have lived with for thousands of years. So as we bring in plants from around the world, our insects and our birds can't adapt quickly enough to utilizing these new introduced plants. Not to say introduced plants are bad, just to say that our insects and birds really rely on native plants, and that's why it's good to have at least some of them in your yard. The other nice thing about native plants is that they're used to our growing conditions here. They're used to the amount of rainfall we get, they're used to the soil types, they're used to our weather, and so you don't have to use herbicides on them. They're healthy just being left alone. So they require a lot less care and they require less watering as well. So they're much easier to maintain overall. All right. So some really cool things to know about native plants. 90% of insects depend on our native plants for survival. So they eat the plants, they lay their eggs on the plants, and many insects pick one or two plants and they live out their whole life cycle and they really depend on that plant. So when you are planting native plants, you're allowing that insect, most insects of which are beneficial, to thrive. And that's really helpful because it can be a real challenge for them to survive. 96% of birds feed on those insects. So if you want birds in your yard, the best thing you can do is plant native plants to bring in the insects because they'll eat those and they also feed those to their young, which is really crucial. 100% of adult amphibians and reptiles also eat insects. So you're creating a whole food web here by planting native plants. Another pretty easy thing you can do while you're picking out native plants is plant different canopy layers. Different birds live at different canopy layers. So for example, at the ground level, we've got towhees, we've got wrens, and then at the higher level, we've got hawks and flycatchers. So there are 5 different canopy levels. We've got ground covers, small shrubs, small trees, and large trees. The more layers you plant, the more wildlife and bird diversity you'll get in your yard. And then reducing pesticides. Pesticides have been in the news quite a bit over the last few years because we're learning more and more about the negative impacts of them on our pollinators specifically, but also on human health and pet health and bird health. And so the main resource that we use in our program is a website called growsmartgrowsafe.org. And it's a great website because if you are using a product at home and you're like, I'm not really sure how toxic this is, you can go onto the website and look it up by the name of the brand or by the ingredients listed and determine whether it's considered a high hazard ingredient or a safe ingredient. And so it's a really great resource. There's also a pledge that you can take, just committing to not using pesticides. So the 5th certification criteria item is wildlife stewardship. And this is for me one of the funnest ones because one of the real joys I get out of naturescaping in my yard is seeing bumblebees and other bees and seeing birds attracted to my yard and really make use of the plants that I have there. So this is a really fun one. But one thing you can do that's pretty easy is put up a water feature in your yard or multiples. I have 3 different saucers that I've laid around my yard at different heights and birds love those. I get to watch them take baths and of course drink water out of them. You can also install a bird or a bat nest box, and they have some available here at Cornell Farm. You can also install some insect nesting habitat. That could be something as simple as a bundle of dead twigs that the insects can lay their eggs in. Snags and nurse logs are also really great habitat. So a snag is a standing dead tree, and you'd want to work with an arborist to get this just right, but they provide crucial habitat to particularly birds that nest in tree cavities. And then also nurse logs, which is a dead tree that's basically laying down and is planted. So those are really great as well. You can also reduce outdoor lighting, which contributes to a darker night sky and really helps with particularly migrating birds. You can also take measures to reduce window strikes, in other words, birds that are hitting your windows. And we have handouts on those, and you can also find decals to attach to your window or other things that can help with that. You can plant a native pollinator meadow. This is a really fun project. You can do this pretty inexpensively by utilizing seeds, native plant seeds, and so this can be a really beautiful feature. And then you can keep your cats inside, which is both really safe for cats and really helps our bird populations, particularly during the spring and summer when the younger birds are fledging. And so those are lots of things that you can do in your own yard. All right, so I'm here at Cornell Farm. They have a great selection of native plants. Maybe you want to know, like, what plant should I buy to get the most bang for my buck in terms of creating habitat. So let's talk about what provides the most habitat per plant. Trees are, I'm an arborist by training, so that's kind of where my passion lies, but there are 4 trees in particular that provide lots of habitat. Vine maples provide food and shelter to 17 different bird species and 3 different mammal species. Then you've got Pacific dogwood, which provides habitat for 20 different bird species and 10 different mammals. Chokecherry, and then chokecherry is another great one, and then Oregon white oak, our native oak tree, provides lots of habitat. 24 different bird species rely on this, and 10 different mammals. So those are some great trees that you can plant if you're interested in trees. Great shrubs. I won't go into so much detail with all of the shrubs, but blue elderberry, red osier dogwood, red huckleberry, and salmonberry are all really great shrubs for birds and insects. And then herbaceous plants are miner's lettuce, wood strawberry, or really any of our native strawberries, red columbine, wood sorrel, and sluice sedge. A lot of our native grasses are really great for insects in particular, but also for birds and small mammals. So those are some plants that provide the most bang for the buck. And this information is available on the Portland plant list. There is a page on there where it kind of showcases what habitat is created from what plants. All right, so a really kind of fun, easy project to implement in your yard is a native hedgerow. And a hedgerow is basically a fancy term for planting a series of shrubs. They can be different sizes or they can all be the same size. But you're basically planting a row of shrubs. This can work really well up against a fence, maybe around the perimeter of your yard. But hedgerows are really cool because they provide really crucial nesting and habitat for birds. 60% of our local birds live in that shrub layer. So when they can get back inside of a large shrub, they're really protected, and that's where they can create their nests and raise their young safely. There's also lots of food in there, so it's a real win. Some really great plants for pollinators, for bees, and other beneficial insects are Douglas spirea, showy fleabane, western columbine, foam flower, meadow checker mallow, and common snowberry. And pollinators are a thing that we like to focus on in our program, so often we'll provide handouts to participants who are interested in planting these types of flowers. It's good to know with pollinators that one of the best techniques you can use if you are planting for pollinators is to plant a handful of things that will bloom in the spring, and then a handful of things that will bloom in the summer, and then another cluster that blooms in the fall. And this way, for those beneficial insects that live for multiple seasons, they're going to have food throughout each of those seasons that they're around. So that's really beneficial to them. All right, and so now with all these tips, you can create a really beautiful yard that's good for you because you have something nice to look at and a fun place to hang out in, but also good for birds and bees and the other wildlife that we share this home with. Thank you for joining us. I'm going to go ahead and say thank you to Cassie and Zoe for inviting me here today into Cornell Farm for being a supporter of the Backyard Habitat certification program.